right, so today we're going to be talking about protect thy energy. In the meditation that we just did, y'all created that energetic barrier around yourself. That's part of it, but it's a very small part of it. Yeah. So, how do I protect my energy? There's 3 things that we're going to talk about today, and that's understanding and growing in emotional maturity, understanding and creating boundaries, and understanding and becoming aware of projection. Anyone unsure what a projection is? Yeah, well, we're going to find out. And the disclaimer is, if you get triggered, that's not my fault. It's your fault. So look at yourself, okay? All right, so the little thing at the top says, at its core, emotional maturity is a matter of improving your communication with yourself. Emotional maturity is a big deal. And we see things all around us all the time where people aren't displaying very much emotional maturity. And you may not even know what emotional maturity is at this point, and that's okay. That's why we're here. That's why we're going to talk about it. So, what is emotional maturity? Emotional maturity is the ability to understand, manage, and respond to your emotions in a balanced, thoughtful way. Okay? Who knows what embodiment means? Well, I'm going to tell you. Embodiment is where you are in your body. You're aware of your body. When traumatic experiences happen, different things throughout our lives, sometimes we dissociate from our bodies, and then we're feeling things, but we don't really know what we're feeling, and a lot of times we kind of run away from that, or we numb it with substances, or whatever the case. But emotional maturity is knowing what you're feeling and responding to it in a way that helps to create what you want for yourself instead of take away from it. It also involves a high level of self-awareness and the capacity to navigate emotions, both your own and those of others, without being overwhelmed or acting impulsively. Has anyone ever heard the phrase, it's okay to be angry, but how you react in anger is what makes the difference? Has anyone ever reacted in anger in a way that did not help them very much? I have, yeah. And I still do from time to time, but as my emotional maturity grows, I'm able to be angry and realize where that anger is coming from and, deal with it accordingly instead of taking it out on somebody else. So emotional maturity is also a gradual process that comes from self-reflection, experience, and working through challenges. Anyone ever had any challenges? No. I have. And the ability to handle life's complexities with greater balance, and it helps form deeper, more meaningful relationships. How many of us could use deeper, more meaningful relationships? Yes, sir. Yeah, that's what we're here for. We're creating that right now. It's beautiful. The characteristics of emotional maturity. Now, this is the part where we get to look at ourselves and say, do I display these characteristics? Are these things that I currently possess? Are these things I'm working on? Are these things that, even though I have them, I still have to do the work to maintain them? Okay? So self-awareness, understanding your own emotions, triggers, and responses, and being mindful of how these influence your behavior and impact others. Okay? So that self-awareness is a huge part of emotional maturity. In a lot of ways, they're kind of the same thing. But it's like, you can be self-aware and know that your favorite thing in the world to do is barbecue. But that has nothing to do with emotional maturity. Now, emotional maturity and the self-aware coincide because if you're feeling anything, whatever emotion it is, whether it's anger, sadness, shame, anything, emotional maturity is being aware of that, what it is, and wrapping it up in a pretty nice bow to deal with it in a way that does serve you and doesn't hurt another person, right? Self-regulation, controlling impulses and managing difficult emotions, pausing to process, to respond thoughtfully, instead of reacting immediately and irrationally. I know I've reacted irrationally a few times in my life. Most of the time it's because of fear. Fear kind of is the driving force. We think sometimes we feel the anger, but the anger is derived from fear. We don't want to be disrespected. We don't want somebody to hurt us, and we're afraid of that. We're afraid of rejection. And so that emotion comes up and we trigger, and then we try to hold on to everything or make it so that people can't hurt us. And the thing is we're hurting ourselves with those reactions. So empathy and understanding is another characteristic of emotional maturity. And your perspective is not the only one nor is it the only correct one. You never know what another person is experiencing. And that's, this goes back to kind of not taking things personally. Like, I love the Four Agreements. It's like my favoriteest book in the whole world. It's my favoriteest practice in the whole world because it works. And if you can get to a place where you're not taking anything personally, or at least not very often, and you're not making assumptions, well, then you can embrace empathy and understanding. In my practice, I talk about empathy. You got sadness and you've got joy. Those are opposites. We live in a dualistic world, right? What do you think the opposite of anger is? Empathy. Empathy. The opposite of anger is empathy, because if I'm mad at somebody for something that they supposedly did to me or something I assume they did to me, the opposite of that is empathizing for why they did that thing that I'm thinking they did to me. Does that make sense? Accountability. When you take responsibility for your own emotions, your own actions, your own mistakes, your own reactions, instead of shifting blame. If my wife, Raina, says something that I find to be disrespectful and I trigger and I get angry, it's not going to do me any good to say, you made me angry. Because ultimately that trigger is mine. I triggered. Why did I trigger? Well, I felt disrespected. Well, why did I feel disrespected? Well, because my child self experienced that same thing, when I was 14. Who knows? But that's mine to explore instead of projecting my anger towards her or onto her. Another characteristic is adaptability. Shit happens. Adapt and overcome. That's what we say in the Marine Corps. By the way, today is the 249th birthday of my beloved United States Marine Corps. Semper Fidelis, hoorah.
Oh, no.
And so shit happens, you adapt and overcome rather than becoming overwhelmed and dwelling on the setbacks. Dwelling on them doesn't help us. It doesn't. Like, how many times has something happened and you start worrying about it and allowing that fear to remain in there, and the thing that happened is extended indefinitely until you realize, like, oh crap, I'm doing this to myself. And then the last characteristic is healthy boundaries. And please keep in mind, these aren't the only characteristics. These are just primary characteristics, okay? Healthy boundaries, it's knowing how to say no when you need to say no. It's knowing how to say, you know what? I'm going to love you, but right now I'm going to have to love you over here, okay? But at the same time, that's also being aware of why you're setting that boundary. Are you setting that boundary because you're continuing to blame that person for how you feel? Or are you setting that boundary because you know that for your best interest right now you need some space? So you can discover that and explore it a little bit. Next, we have understanding and creating boundaries. I've talked about boundaries a couple times in the past, and boundaries are not necessarily trying to control the actions of another person. It's letting another person know what you're going to do if they abuse you, or if they continue to do something. And in this case, it's not necessarily just those kinds of boundaries, but boundaries protect mental health through defining clear limits in your interactions, time, and energy that prioritize your well-being. So they protect your mental health because you're defining clear limits. Like, you're not going to talk to me like that. You're not going to raise your voice to me like that. If you do, this is what I'm going to do. But it's to protect your energy, to protect yourself, so that, because if you're with a person that constantly berates you or talks down to you condescendingly or makes fun of you or whatever, that's not helping you grow. It's not contributing to your maintaining of a high vibration, right? And so sometimes you have to put some space between you and that person. That's what a boundary is, okay? Boundaries allow you to preserve emotional energy, avoid burnout, and maintain a sense of control over your life. We all like control, don't we? We like to be in control. We don't like it when control is taken from us. And it's funny because the most freeing feeling in the world is surrender. And that's the surrender of control and allowing whatever to come, and understanding that whether you perceive it as good or bad, it contributes to your betterment. It contributes to your higher purpose. That's a hard thing to do, though, right? Boundaries are not about pushing people away or being rigid, okay? This goes back to what I said. It's not, I'm going to set this boundary because I don't like that you do this. I don't like that you go here. I don't like that you eat lunch with this person. That's not a boundary, okay? That's a manipulation, a manipulative tool trying to control another person, okay? And you also got to consider that, if you have conflict with somebody, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong and you're right. And like you place a boundary, and I've seen it before, like the spiritual ego, right? It's like you elevate yourself to this place where you're like, I'm a highly spiritual person, I'm good, my relationship with God is good, whatever the case is, right? And then you start saying, well, this person can't be around me because they're not as good as I am, or, stuff like that, okay? That's not what we're talking about, okay? That is the complete absence of self-awareness, So, boundaries are about valuing your mental health and knowing your needs. And this helps you build healthier relationships and a balanced life, free from unnecessary stress or burnout. So set thy boundaries, right? We defined about what boundaries are. Now we're going to talk about how to set them, okay? You identify your limits, recognize what tends to drain you or cause you stress. This is where boundaries are needed. So in your life, if you can think of the things that make you feel anxiety, well, I'm not going to use the word make you feel, okay? When you feel anxiety, that is likely an indication that something or someone is not contributing to your highest good. Or maybe they are, maybe they're there to teach you, right? To teach you to set a boundary. I think it's funny because you've got narcissists and then you've got empaths, right? That's the two words you hear a lot. They're hot words on Facebook and stuff like that. But the narcissist and the empath usually attract each other, and it's because the narcissist has to teach the empath how to set boundaries, and the empath has to teach the narcissist how to not be an asshole, And so it's funny, but they find themselves, and then, they get mad at each other. Well, he's a narcissist. Well, she's too soft, whatever the case is. But it's there. That's the balance. That's the Tao, right? Be careful and direct. Communicate your boundaries openly and respectfully. This is a very important. Be impeccable with your word, the first agreement. If you are setting a boundary, talk about it to the person you're setting it with, or whatever it is. If it's, like maybe you don't like your job and you have to set a boundary. Maybe they're making you work too much and they're not paying you, enough for it, or they're not paying you at all. Who knows? But that's where you set boundaries, because I am the only person that's responsible for how I feel. I am the only person responsible for my anxiety, for my stress levels, for any of that stuff. And so if I'm not saying no and placing boundaries where I need to place them, whose fault is it? It's mine. I have to take responsibility for that. So practice saying no. It's okay saying no to help you preserve time for nourishment rather than depletion. That goes into self-care. Self-care is setting boundaries. Self-care is being aware of the things that stress you out, the things that complicate your life, the things that you don't necessarily have to continue. Self-care isn't just getting your nails done and taking hot bubble baths. That's part of it. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like a pedicure just as much as anyone else, but it's a lot more than that. It's a lot deeper than that. Set emotional boundaries too. Don't take on the emotions of others as your own. We see this a lot in relationships. It's called codependency. And that's when your partner is upset, your partner's sad, your partner's mad, and you're like, what did I do? Why are they mad? It's my responsibility. They're supposed to be happy all the time. It's not. It's not your responsibility. Their emotions are their emotions. Yours are yours. And one of the greatest, I put this on Facebook yesterday, but the greatest flex is maintaining a high vibration regardless of who or what is around you, right? And that's like if your partner's struggling with something, if they're in a mood, whatever, like that isn't yours to carry. You can support them. You can ask them if they need help. But ultimately, you have to learn to have your own vibration independent of theirs. And that's a tough thing to do, especially with as much childhood trauma and stuff like that the generations in this room have experienced. Enforce boundaries consistently. When you gently reinforce when someone oversteps, you help them learn to take your boundaries seriously and respect them over time. You don't have to be like, I told you not to do this, and this is, because that's not making things better, right? That's the reaction. That's your reaction. But you can say, hey, I didn't like that you talked to me like that. Or I didn't like that you raised your voice at me. I didn't like that you were completely oblivious to, my timeline or the things that I needed or whatever, But you don't have to do it in anger. You don't have to do it when you're emotionally charged. It's better to let yourself calm down first. Prioritize self-care. I want everyone to look at me right now. You are the most important person in your life. Plain and simple. Not your spouse, not your kids, not your dog. Nobody. You are the most important person in your life. You matter. How you feel matters. Your boundaries matter. Your self-care matters. And now we go to projection. The most dangerous psychological mistake is the projection of the shadow onto others. This is the root of almost all conflict. And that's a true statement. Anyone ever been projected on? Doesn't feel good, right? Anyone ever projected onto somebody else? Yeah, okay. Good. I'm glad y'all are aware of that. So what is projection? Projection is a defense mechanism where a person unconsciously attributes their own thoughts, feelings, or traits to someone else. That's the whole, you made me angry. I'm angry because of you. I'm hurt because of you. I'm embarrassed because of you. Whatever the emotion is, if you're pointing the finger, you're projecting. If you say, man, I don't like that person because they're always late, that's projection too. Because I'm sure every single one of us has been late at one time or another. And so projection, the way I understand it is if I'm accusing anybody of doing anything or pointing the finger at them or blaming them for something, I'm projecting because I have the capacity to do the same thing that I'm saying that they're doing, right? And I don't like that part about myself. And so in order for me to be blind to it and ignore that part of myself, I got to put it on somebody else. That's projection. Projection often happens when a person has uncomfortable or unacceptable emotions that they struggle to acknowledge, so they project these feelings onto others as a way of coping. Yeah, there's people that are typically angry people will point out angry people. People people that feel guilty about something that they've done will try to highlight other things that other people have done of the same nature. And so they don't have to look at that part of themselves. They don't have to look at that shadow. Instead, they can point it out in everyone else. But that doesn't help you grow. That doesn't help your emotional maturity or your self-awareness. Projection can affect relationships and communication as it can lead to misunderstandings and conflicts. Again, it's probably the number one cause of conflicts. Because if you're projecting onto somebody else, you're not looking at yourself. There's something I say all the time, whether it's with clients or with myself. But when somebody's saying, yeah, my husband this, oh, blah, 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 he always does this or she always does this, I'm like, how's that also true about you? And that's a hard question. It's a question that'll piss somebody off real quick too, right? And so I don't recommend, telling your spouse that or anything like that, because it's, you might at least wait till they calm down. But yeah, saying, how's that also true about you? But then you got to turn around and ask yourself too, that's self-awareness. Recognizing projection allows people to own their own feelings, address them directly instead of blaming them on others. If you recognize your own projections, and most of the time it's after the fact. Most of the time you're like, oh, you know what? Oh my gosh, I was just projecting all over that person. And then you're like, you know what? I don't want to do that anymore, so I'm going to examine that, and then I'm going to go apologize, and I'm going to make that right. And that's great. You can also project positively onto people. When you compliment somebody, that's a projection. When you say, hey, you're a beautiful person, that's because you feel like a beautiful person too. There's a part of you that is a beautiful person, wants to be a beautiful person, and so you're projecting that too. That's also being impeccable with your word. Realizing that when you compliment somebody else, you're kind of wanting that for yourself too. Understanding projection can lead to a deeper self-awareness and help individuals work through unresolved emotions, leading to more authentic self and connections with others. Notice in all three of these, it talks about better relationships and better connections with other people. All three of these topics that we talked about today lead to that. And if that's what you want, it's time to do some work. Examples of projection I've already given a few, but we'll do some more. If someone feels insecure, unworthy, they might project these feelings by assuming others think poorly of them. Anyone ever experienced that? You know, if you're insecure and you feel like you're unworthy of love or not good enough to do the job you're doing or whatever the case is, you may project that onto somebody else, again, because you don't want to look at it. If someone feels anger but is uncomfortable expressing it, they might accuse others of being angry or hostile. We talked about that one already. This helps them to distance themselves from their own difficult emotions. Projection is just another way of dissociating from your body. If you're an embodied person, a self-aware person, an emotionally mature person, you're more aware of when you're projecting, and you avoid projection a lot more because you're taking responsibility for how you're feeling. If someone feels embarrassed or ashamed because of another's behavior, he or she may be projecting their own judgments onto others, assuming they're judging the person in the same way she is. You hear that a lot in gossip. You know, oh, did you see so-and-so? Did you see what she wore? And you're assuming that the person that you're talking to is making that same judgment. But that's your judgment. And so you're projecting your own judgment onto another person, assuming that they're judging in the same way you are. Does that make sense? I said judgment a lot. I don't like that. And lastly, if someone projects feelings of jealousy onto a partner by accusing them of being untrustworthy, they may not trust themselves or may feel shame for something they have done. And that's not just with untrustworthy. You know, think about times when you've accused your spouse of something or you've been angry at them for something. And if you can go back and remember what you were doing in that moment, how you were feeling in that moment, and see if that anger or that blame was still justified. It usually isn't. Now, that's not to say that people don't do terrible things sometimes. And that doesn't mean to say that you allow people to do terrible things to you either. It just means that you're aware that you're not going to do terrible things to others, and that you're going to love and care and accept others. So, lastly, what you put out is what you get back. This is like the golden rule. The golden rule is present in every religion that I've ever studied. And it's, love others as you would love yourself. What you put out is what you get back. And so when you're putting out anger, anger is what you get back. We talked about yesterday in our podcast episode that, when you learn to maintain a high vibration where you feel good most of the time, you start noticing that low vibratory things are no longer happening. And that the people that would once want to start a fight with you or call you names or gossip about you, they're no longer there because you're vibrating at a level that they're not. And so that's a good way for me to look at it anyway, but what you put out is what comes back. So with that said, I like to make sure that what I'm putting out is love and acceptance and empathy and consideration and patience and responding with those things too, even when I feel angry. For those of you who are watching, this is Mystics of Texas. We talk about stuff like this every single Sunday. Sometimes we paint too, that's cool. And then we meditate, and it's a lot cooler in person. And we would love for y'all to come join us. Our group is growing. We have more and more people coming every Sunday, and it's turning into a beautiful community of exactly that: love, support, encouragement, consideration, empathy, and all of the things. And it's good to have other people that are working on themselves and growing around you as you work on yourself and grow too. So if you're looking for a spiritual home with thought-provoking topics and loving people, join us here at Mystics of Texas every Sunday at 1:15 here in Karnak. We're close to the Louisiana border and close to East Texas too. So thank y'all. If you want more information, you can go to mysticsoftexas.com. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Love y'all.